Hey, good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Innovate HPE MOOC that we've done, Season 2. We are so happy to have with us tonight Dr. Tony Sinanis, co-author of Hacking Leadership, which we built the whole season around. Our keynote speaker in 2018 in the fall will be Joe Sanfelippo, his co-author. And I didn't feel like we could have a full season built around a book without talking to the other half of the tandem that wrote this book, Tony Sinanis. So I'll let him take a few minutes to introduce himself, and then we'll talk about changing mindset, the last piece for the book. So Tony, if you could just take a few minutes and say hello.
Sure, thank you. Hi, Todd. So I am Tony Sinanis. I am a superintendent of schools in Hastings-on-Hudson School District in Westchester, New York, right outside of New York City. And I am co-author of the Hacking Leadership book with my brother from another mother, Joe Sanfelippo. And you guys are going to have a blast when he does come out and keynote for you and work with you guys. Such an inspiration and such a positive person who really just loves what he does. So it's pretty infectious. Prior to being a superintendent, I was an assistant superintendent for curriculum and instruction. And then before that, I was an elementary principal for 10 years, which was great. Definitely the best job on the planet. And before that, I was an elementary school teacher in suburban New York and also in New York City. I'm a dad. I have a little, not little, he's 13. He's an 8th grader. Crazy to think that he's going to high school in the fall. And I'm I try to blog whenever I can. And I've had the fortune of being able to present at different conferences and workshops and just connect with educators from across the country who have really inspired me and helped shape my thinking and make me a better educator. So thanks for having me.
Well, thanks for being here tonight, Tony. Joining us a little bit late, but better late than never. Our co-host for this season and bringing the administrative perspective. One of the most talented administrators that I know. He's an assistant principal at the Cumberland Valley School District in Mechanicsburg, Pennsylvania. And this is Brian Robinson, Tony. I'm not sure you didn't get a chance to meet him in our
pre-show. Hey, Brian, how are you?
Good, Tony. Sorry about that, guys. I was dropping off a swimmer and logistics got messed up.
No worries. You made it. It's all good.
I'm here. Excited.
We're glad you're here, Brian. I'll just start tonight. I'm not sure if Jessica's going to be joining us tonight. I know she's flying back from San Antonio. She had a week at culinary school that she got for Christmas from her husband, which is super cool. I can't wait to go to her house and let her try it. If you're in the Pittsburgh area, Tony, look us up and I'll give you directions to her house.
I do like Pittsburgh. I'm not going to lie. It's a great city. And we were just talking about it yesterday, but it's a bit far for a drop by.
True, that's true. Just if you're passing through.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, anyway, so we're going to talk about the last chapter, which I think is probably the most important way to tie this whole book on hacking leadership together. And just to wrap up the season real quick, we are approaching this season in leadership and looking at leadership from a standpoint of you're a leader no matter what level you are. If you're a superintendent like Tony, you lead principals. If you're a principal, you lead teachers. If you're a teacher, you lead students, and students lead each other. So this kind of this stuff all translates to no matter what leadership situation you find yourself in. And tying the final part of this together is changing mindsets. And you called it a deficit mindset when you started the chapter, which was interesting. And I think that's a standpoint that the ebbs and flows of a career. I think we can all get there once in a while.
Yeah, for sure.
Changing mindsets is such an important part of any organizational change. When you jumped to admin for the first time, how prevalent was the deficit mindset? Or was it something that you didn't really have to overcome because your predecessor had really established something well?
That's an interesting. Well, okay. So I think the deficit mindset is prevalent in education, right? Like I think it's just sort of part of the construct, unfortunately. And I think that could be, a reality for different reasons depending on the community, right? It could be a community that is under-resourced. It could be a community that is impacted by poor leadership, right? Whatever that leadership might be. It could be a community that is affected by some societal issues that are, sort of bleeding into the schools and the district or whatever. And I think that deficit mindset, because it really can range, right? There's a range of what deficit mindset looks like. But when you hear things like these teachers can't do that, or, these kids, sure, they might be able to do that, but not those kids, or we can't expect that from these parents because they don't speak English, or whatever, whatever the variables are, whatever the conditions are. And so I think the deficit mindset is one that just is there. Now, again, it's not necessarily because of an individual. It's not necessarily because of a specific problem. I think it's just a construct that exists. And I would say globally in society, but I think we certainly see it in education, because education is so driven by numbers, by data, by test scores. And so when we attach that to a human being, when we have to deal with the outcomes of that, we tend to get defensive. We tend to kind of rationalize it if it's not exactly where we want it to be. So how do we eradicate that? I think that's a process, and that is a process that, from my vantage point, starts with just shifting the focus in schools from the adults to the kids. So when we can focus our work, and our daily behaviors and our thinking and our mindsets, on what is best for kids and keeping them at the center of the work, I think that's kind of where we start to see that mindset dissipate on some level, right? When I started as a elementary assistant principal, and then subsequently the following year as a principal, I do think that a deficit mindset was there. And again, as to no fault of any one individual person, there was a lot of change in leadership. The community changed demographically, right? So there was like a whole shift in the community and in the ethnic breakdown of the community. And our staff, our teachers, did not necessarily get enough PD on how to navigate that shift, right? And so when they were thinking about the kids in front of them, they were not like the same kids who were in front of them 2 years before that or 5 years before that. And in order to be able to meet the needs of the students sitting in front of you, right? Because as educators, we teach kids. We don't teach curriculum. We don't teach content. We teach kids. In order to teach the kids in front of you, you need a whole bag of skills, right? And it's not just how to differentiate. It's how to relate. It's how to connect. It's how to make yourself available, and how to understand and empathize with those sitting before you. So for me, that I think was definitely part of the challenge when I first became an administrator. But again, not to anyone's fault, right? Like no one was like, yeah, we're not doing this kind of thing. It was more like, we don't know how to do this. Like we need training on this, or we need to better understand that. And how do we engage a community around this work? And there's a level of vulnerability, right? When you do that, and vulnerability is scary because you open yourself up to maybe not so positive feedback. And how do you navigate that without being defensive, and then hence the deficit mindset, again, taking over. So yeah.
No, thank you.
Yeah. No
So Tony, when you approach that as a new leader, and then now as you think about how you spread your message to other leaders, did you start out focusing on the early adopters, or did you look to the majority and try to move those folks to the middle?
Wow, that's a great question. I tried to focus on myself, and how to model what I was hoping to see in others, and how to model the mistakes that I was going to make along the way, and openly kind of reflect on those, so that we can see this is going to be a journey that is right. That graphic that success is the straight line versus success is that squiggly line, and we know the squiggly line is more reflective of what it is. So I think that's what that was, right? So there was some work with early adopters who were willing to try different things, and you want to capitalize on that, because then you could show that it's possible within that context. And you want to say, here, come down the hall to this room and check this out. We can do this here, right? These kids can do that. Our school can do this, and so you do want to leverage those early adopters, but you have to be super conscious of that, because you don't want to alienate them. You don't want to, make them the, well, of course they're doing it, like that's his favorite, or, whatever. And that can happen too. As that's happening, you are working with the majority and trying to shift them over. I think oftentimes shifting a mindset can be a lot more challenging than shifting a behavior. So sometimes just shifts in behavior, just changing the things that we do and how we do them. And they could be really basic things, like the way we lesson plan or the way we present information, right? Once we start changing behaviors, eventually we start to see a shift in mindset, where the other way around also can happen, right? You can start to shift people's mindset and then affect behaviors. But I find that to be more challenging to do with a large group of people, because you're dealing with personalities, you're dealing with emotions, you're dealing with previous experiences. So if you can show people that a slight change in behavior that's in their best interest, that helps them do their job better, might also shift their thinking, then that might be the way to go. And, Peter Senge writes about that in organizational theory as well, and how that kind of happens. But I do think that you have to be working both of those groups, right? Thinking about the early adopters and how to leverage them without alienating them, and then thinking about the majority and how to slowly get them to try different things and shift those behaviors so you can eventually see an evolving mindset. But that whole time has to be happening parallel to you modeling for everyone else, right? So.
No,
great answer. Yeah. I was actually just, I read George Couros' blog about the power of saying no.
Yes.
And he talked about, not burning out yourself, but also not burning out all those early adopters and the folks who we always tend to, gosh, I need someone to take on this new project. Am I going to work on the person who is really difficult and, it's going to take a lot of time, or can I go to that person who I know is going to do it? And when we do that over and over, they get exhausted. So that's a really important balance there. Shifting focus a little bit, you talked about connecting the parents and the students to things that they want to learn, to things that are important to them and to their communities. And obviously that's scary for all of us who may be trying to stay in the status quo.
Yeah.
When you talk about teaching things beyond the curriculum or things that aren't in the standards, how do you work on that balance between the standards and the curriculum and the things that students and communities might actually want to learn?
I think that's a great question. I think it's the question with no exact answer. What I do know is that who we are as people affects who we are as learners and affects who we are as educators and who we are as students, right? And so when we can at least place value on the sociocultural experiences that our kids and families have outside of school and somehow link them into the things happening in school, then I think we just change the relationship just slightly, right? So if we know that we are working in a community where many of our students are being raised by a grandparent because their parents are working 2 or 3 jobs, we want to be mindful of that because that relationship between a grandparent and a child affects the way that a child thinks, right? If we're living in a community where the majority of our children spend time after school with a babysitter or a nanny or I don't know, whatever, we want to be mindful of that because that affects the experiences that we will have in school. So I cannot underscore enough the importance of placing value, of respecting and appreciating those sociocultural experiences. And those start with even just do a survey when parents start at your school, when families start, like get to know who they are, get to know what their day looks like. Not that you're prying for information, you're not using it for judgment purposes. So you could say, well, look at this kid. He goes home, by himself and he's home by himself till 6 o'clock. Terrible parents. No, that's not the case, right? You have parents who are working whatever they need to do to be in that community, right? To live in that home. But you want to know that potentially. What languages do people speak outside of school? What celebrations do people have outside of school? What religions do they subscribe to? Those things affect our kids and our teachers, and those experiences inform the perspectives within which we look at things, right? They may not drive every decision we make, but they certainly color the lens when we look at things. My parents are immigrants. I'm the first person in my family to graduate college. It affects the way that I look at things, right? It doesn't drive everything that I do, but it affects the way that I look at things, and it affects the way my parents look at things, and so on and so forth. So I think that if we can place value on who our kids and their families are outside of school and give them opportunities to bring that into the school experience, again, while respecting their privacy, while respecting, what's close to their heart and maybe not wanting to put it out there, then I think we just change the relationship between home and school, and it sort of evolves into more of a partnership than we'll do this in school and you take care of that outside of the school. Where really we want to support kids, we have to support kids together, right? Because it's all about relationships. And when kids are in school, basically we're their parents, and so how do we maximize everyone who's invested in these kids to do its best?
So Tony, right off of that is just something to keep in mind that we hadn't really pre-planned to discuss, but like in the news, you hear a lot about the immigration policies that are in the news all the time, and different socioeconomic groups not liking each other and so on. Can you talk about any experiences, or have you seen experiences where you have two parent groups that don't particularly care for each other for whatever religious or whatever background, and and how you navigated that as a building leader.
It's interesting. So we did have a demographic shift happen in the community where I first was principal. So it went from in a 10-year period, it went from being 70 approximately 80% white to being less than 10% white in like a 10-year period, right? And the majority of the community was Latino and African American, also Caribbean American, right? And so there was a tremendous shift, and that led to just some fracturing within the community, right? Because people that had been there forever were like, "What's going on in our community?" And why are these people in our community? Those were things that were said by people. The Board of Education changed, our superintendent changed, and so there was so much instability in within the school district, right? And then there's this change in the community, and because of that, things are falling through the cracks, and people are kind of sitting at odds with each other, right? Almost like adversarially, but not intentionally going at each other, but because everyone's sort of fighting for what's important to them and trying to honor who they are. That we were lacking like the skill set that we needed. We were lacking the focus that we needed to implement like culturally responsive approaches, both instructionally and just as it relates to engagement. And so that was incredibly challenging. I mean, there were some heated board meetings where people said things that were, I mean, I was like blown away by the things that like these kids, what do I care about this family? I don't know. Or these people are bringing down our real estate value. I mean, people said that out loud, right? Which is crazy. Not our staff, not anyone within the school district, but our parents were sitting at odds, right? Our families were sitting at odds. And we, like I said, we were lacking the training and the professional and personal learning opportunities to help fill that gap, to help take that educational experience beyond just the standards, beyond just math and reading and writing. We really had to kind of figure out how we can best support our community and help them evolve and ensure that we were implementing practices that were reflective of who our community was that day, right at that time. I give you an example. Like when I first got there, that community, it was the type of community that come Christmas, there was, Santa Clauses everywhere and, I don't know, reindeer and snowmen and all that stuff. Well, when the community started to shift, Christmas wasn't the number one celebrated holiday around that time. In fact, there were a lot of families who were not celebrating any holidays because we saw, Jehovah's Witnesses, or we saw families that celebrated different holidays. We had to make a shift, and that was difficult to do because we were not prepared for it, right? We had to recognize that what we do in school does have to reflect what's going on outside, right? There have to be windows and mirrors for everyone, things that we can see through so we can understand how others live, but then places where we can see ourselves so that we can better understand who we are and how we are, right? And so that was an incredibly challenging time. And I think I had 3 superintendents in 3 years. So, and you can only imagine how that works, right? Because then leadership is changing. So nothing is kind of moving forward because you're just waiting to see what the next person's going to do or say or whatever. And so at that point, it was just like survival, survival for everyone, for our staff, for our kids, for our families. And how can we just keep the tone positive, even if it wasn't where it needed to be, even if we didn't have the skills exactly we needed, how can we at least keep it positive and focused on kids? So.
That sounds so challenging, Tony. And I'm wondering if in this era of social media, when you guys talk about flattening the walls of your school and telling your story, do you think that it might be easier in this era for a school or a school district to get that positive message out to the greater community about what's going on, the positive things that are going on in school? Can you talk about how maybe leverage that part to diffuse some of that tension in the community?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And I could tell you that at the time, that wasn't something that we leveraged. We were so really focused on just trying to, as I said, stay healthy, right, and stay positive. That was not even the focus. But I could tell you, as I grew as a leader, I realized that was a big part of it, right? Because we wanted to not just involve our families. We didn't want people to just come out for a bake sale or, I don't know, clothing drive or whatever. We wanted people to engage in the learning. We wanted people to understand what we were doing and why we were doing it. And so social media allowed us to kind of take that and amplify and accelerate it. When I first started out, we did a paper newsletter like 3 times a year or 4 times a year. But by the time it went out, I think it was 4 times a year. So like went out beginning of November, and the spotlight was the opening of school because that's like okay, that happened 2 months ago. Or went out in January, and like the Halloween dance was there. Yeah, I don't know, whatever. And so
Fall festival, fall
yeah,
festival.
that kind of
Yes.
right. So how do we change that? Because it's irrelevant at that point, right? We don't want anything we share with parents to be irrelevant. We want it to be relevant. We want it to be dynamic. We want it to matter so that they can engage in a way that's meaningful. So that when their kid comes home, it's not, how was school today? Oh, fine. Because that's what every kid says, and what'd you do today? No, nothing, but we know they didn't do anything, right? We know they didn't do nothing. So instead, giving families opportunities to just to know. So the question can become, tell me about that writing lesson. I saw some third graders were doing, personal narrative, or tell me about the yoga activity you were doing in phys ed. What was that like? Who was that involving? Who led that or whatever? And suddenly the conversation is different. And when families can be part of that aspect of the learning, part of that aspect of the school experience, what I saw happen is a building of trust because there was a high level of transparency. If I'm showing you that we're doing yoga in our phys ed class, it's because we believe this is what's best for kids. If I'm showing you that we're letting our kids have 10 extra minutes of recess, it's because we need that movement time. If I'm showing you that one-on-one reading conferences between a teacher and a student is something we devote time to, it's because it matters. It's what we believe in. It's what we stand for. And so put that out there because it allows families to then get behind that as well. So you're not just coming to them when you need a budget or a referendum pass, or you're not just coming to them when you want to, I don't know, buy something and you need a grant or whatever. You're coming to them as partners in this work. And again, giving them an entry point that feels good for them. Not everyone can engage all of the time, and not everyone can engage in deep ways all of the time. And so here it is. It's all there for you. It's dynamic. It's current. You find the place, to enter and to engage in a way that feels good for you.
Well, Tony, one of the things that just talking about that, one of the first times I ever learned about you was on YouTube when you did your newsletter videos, and I don't know if you're the originator of that, but I'll tell our listeners out there, if you just go to YouTube and you type Tony Sinanis into it, see video newsletters involving kids, and it's just a fantastic concept. Were you the originator of that, or did you steal that idea? Because I know in education we always borrow and steal from each other, but it makes it a good thing.
Definitely. So I can't tell you, I can't take credit for it because I can't imagine that I came up with something like that because I'm not that smart, nor am I that creative. But I can tell you that wherever it came from my PLN for sure, right? And so I don't remember if it was that someone was actually doing video newsletters with their kids, or because I vaguely remember seeing a principal doing video like communications, which I thought was cool, kind of giving those updates from himself to the community and to his staff. And Peter DeWitt wrote about that as well, about flipping leadership and using video to kind of communicate things. So I definitely saw the idea. I may not have seen that exact thing, or I may have seen it. I can't really remember. But I took that idea and I kind of ran with it because I feel like, if we're going to tell a story, who's the story, right? Like, who is the story about? It's about our kids. Our kids are the story, right? Our staff, they are the story. And so put them right at the center of it. And there's like nothing cuter than a bunch of, fifth graders, fourth graders, kindergartners, whatever, talking about the things that are going on. And they talked about what we were learning. Like first grade is, counting to 100, whatever, and second grade is researching nonfiction, whatever. It gave parents an entry point to understand what the continuum looked like. So not just what was going on in their kid's room, but they could see, oh, wow, my kid gets to fourth grade, they're going to learn about the 3 branches of government. Or when they get to fifth grade, they're going to study, oceanography or whatever. And that just changes the conversation again, right? And so we would get like hundreds of hits every week on the video, which is cool, The kids loved doing it. It was awesome. And it took me all of like 30 minutes in the course of a week. Like I'd meet with them on a Monday morning for like 5 or 10 minutes to kind of give them their assignment. They then had to go find out all the information, and they'd come back like Wednesday or Thursday. We'd have lunch together, and then we'd use the iPad, use the TouchCast app, and just I would hold the iPad and video them. They came up with everything they wanted to say, how they wanted to say it, and they were super excited to be part of it. I stayed out of picking kids. I gave that to the teachers. Like, you pick the kids because I don't even want to hear that we didn't pick kids or someone got left out. I was like, that's on you. I just want the kids to come downstairs, you know. And they were great about it. And honestly, by the time we got through like kindergarten, which is like March, we were able to go back up to fifth grade because we kind of did it like that, like fifth grade, fourth grade, third, second. And so there were a lot of kids who got to go because we got to almost go through the entire school twice. So yeah, it was great. It was great.
Well, I'm going to get us back on track to the book a little bit here. And by the way, an old coach told me one time, take the credit because you'll get the blame too. So
yes, there's plenty of blame. That's for sure.
Yeah, take the credit if you want to, because, you know, the blame will come sometime.
Yes.
But, you know, I read in the book in that last chapter, and I love the idea of pushing educators to learn something new to build capacity. And I was very intrigued to hear your story about learning guided by students, you know, especially in the world of technology. How did the professional learning happen? How did that happen? And how was it received the first time? And then I'm sure by now it's probably become the norm. But can you talk a little bit about that process?
Sure. So our kids, you know, so once we started kind of, especially as it relates to technology, right? Like once we started, we made the shift and we did like BYOD, and then we, you know, we started to buy iPads and Chromebooks or whatever. Our kids were really actively engaged in a bunch of, you know, platforms and looking at the Google Suite and, you know, learning how to use Google Slides and Google Docs, but also trying out apps like Telegami or you know, TouchCast or whatever that they were using for the purposes of their learning, to support their learning, to extend their learning, to show their understanding, right? And so, like there were always those teachers who were like a little more comfortable letting the kids kind of run with it, and all right, you guys try that. And there were some people who were like, you can only pick from these two or three. And that's okay. But then it became a conversation amongst the teachers who were like, wait, what are your kids doing? Who could show me how to do that? You know, can someone come show me how to do that? And somewhere along the line that I was like, well, why don't we have our kids come to like a faculty meeting and present on these things, you know? And I remember I went to our fifth grade teachers and I was like, do you think you could each have a group of kids present on a different app or platform that they're using, how they're using it, why they're using it, how, you know, can they show people how to use it? And the kids jumped all over. The teachers were like, okay. I mean, it was work because you have to plan, right, for a PD session. You have to like collaborate and create and sort of think critically about what that experience is going to be like. But that's really powerful learning. So it wasn't like, oh, we stopped learning now to do this. It was like, all right, we're planning to facilitate a PD experience. So we want to make sure that there is some direct instruction. We want to make sure that there is maybe some small group work. We want to make sure that people have a hands-on activity to do, right? Those are the skills we want our kids to have, right? When they leave, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if they know how to add 7 + 2, but how can they, you know, place it within the world, right? And use it within a real life situation. And those are the skills that we saw them developing as they embarked on that kind of stuff. And then it just kind of grew from there. We had fourth graders who came and did PD. We structured one faculty meeting where teachers had choice. So there were kids in, I think, 4 different rooms facilitating 4 different workshops. And the teachers were able to pick two like 20-minute sessions they can go to. And it was great. Like the teachers were open to it. The kids were incredibly patient. They were really great at showing what to do. And they were even better at the one-on-one sort of like, you know, teachers like, wait, I don't know what to do. I'm stuck or whatever. And they'd come right over and kind of talk people through it and not just like take the device from the teacher and do it for them. Like stand over them and say, okay, you know, try this next. And what do you think you should, you know, press now or whatever. And I think when our teachers could see our kids in the role of you know, facilitator, it also was like mind blowing. Like, this is awesome. You know, our kids can do so much. And then our kids seeing our teachers in the role of learners, I think that's really significant and powerful as well. And talk about eradicating the deficit mindset. That's it. Like that's done. Like we've flattened all the walls. We're all learning from each other. We're all leading each other's learning. We're all, you know, learners at one moment or whatever. And that's pretty amazing. So,
I would love to see that at our school because we're at a high school, so our kids can definitely do that. and those soft skills are so critical right now. We know that our community, our employers, colleges, they recognize our students don't have those soft skills. You mentioned technology, and I just want to kind of throw out the generic, broad question about technology's impact on learning. And I just want to give you that softball to hit out of the park, because, whether it's BYOD or one-to-one, whether it's, we don't have the money for it, whether we invest in it, what do you see as technology's role in education right now, 2018?
Listen, very basically, it's all about technology allows us to accelerate our learning, and it allows us to amplify our learning, right? So if nothing else, it allows us to do those two things. And when I say amplify, I mean it allows us, and accelerate, sorry, it allows us to put it out there quickly. It allows us to access information quickly. It allows us to create in ways that we could not create before. And it allows us to present to an audience far beyond the four walls of our classrooms. Like, right, gone are the days. Well, they're not gone, but gone are the only option is to like staple on the wall the writing activity that kids did, or just share with the teacher. Now we can share with so many other people, right? Even if it's just using Google Docs to share with each other in the classroom, that's a much broader reach than when we were just submitting a paper to a teacher. But certainly social media allows you to take it further than that, right? But all that being said, not about the technology, right? It's about what you do with the technology. Innovation is not about throwing a Chromebook in front of a kid. It's about challenging a kid to creatively solve a problem that we've been struggling with for a while, right? Technology allows you to do that maybe in a more enhanced way, but it is not that, right? So I'm sure we've all seen technology being used in a way that it might as well be a worksheet, or it might as well be, a teacher-driven whatever. And that's fine. Like, there's nothing wrong with that, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you need technology to do that, right? But you might need technology to allow kids to collaborate on a PowerPoint, because Google Slides lets you do that, where PowerPoint used to not do that. I think PowerPoint does let you do that now. I don't know.
Yeah, it's all cloud-based now.
Yeah,
so
I'm not really into that piece, but but again, right? We think about those soft skills that we just talked about. People need to be able to collaborate. People need to be able to think critically. People need to be able to communicate. People need to be compassionate while they're working, right? Like, it's not just about academic skills. It's about human skills, right? It's about being life ready, not college ready or career ready. So,
right. So we got like two more things to cover with you, and then we'll wrap up. We talked a little bit about you talked a little bit about redesigning learning environments, and that's something that when I read the first time I read that, I was like, can I start tomorrow? Like, I got super excited about that. And I met Ira Sokol down in Virginia, and he talks about natural light being essential. But George then, in one of the MOOCs, I think it might have been the one you were on, talked about beanbags and sofas aren't necessarily the answer for every kid, and he spoke about himself being the guy that would go over and fall asleep on the couch because it was there. And so when you're talking about redesigning a room, what advice would you give to schools or people thinking about that, and how can we move teachers out of comfort zones? Because I know a lot of them really struggle with that comfort of like the alphabetical order, seating charts, rows, all of that stuff.
Yeah, sure. Well, listen, I no stretch of the imagination an expert on learning spaces, but I've learned a lot from like Bob Dylan and Kayla Delziger. From Ross Cooper has opened my mind to learning spaces, along with many other people in the PLN. And I think that and so if nothing else, what I've learned from these folks and many more, right? And I will say that Kayla specifically, what I think Kayla has taught me, Delzer, sorry, not Delzer, I added a G in there for some reason. What Kayla has really taught me is that kids have to drive that work, that kids have to be part of that conversation. So when you're thinking about a learning environment and a space that is conducive to learning, that you're hoping to see kids engage in, then get them engaged in the design of that space, get them engaged in the setup of that space. And that's really so easy, not expensive, because you could do it with the furniture that you have, but it just changes the conversation, right? And that, again, Kayla, Bob, Ross, and many more people, Rebecca Hare, people, Aaron Klein, people who like sort of open my eyes to this idea that it's not about just going to buy a bunch of cool things like a beanbag or a sofa,
but it's about creating spaces that make people want to like be there physically to engage in the learning, right? And it could just be that you put a carpet down because some kids like to lie down while they're working, or you have, you know, the desks situated in groups, or you lower the legs so much that you don't need chairs. You could just sit on a ball, right? Yeah, whatever the case may be. But you should, I think, at the very least, just start that conversation with kids. Like, so what should our classroom look like? How would our classroom suit our needs best, right? So we know that during writer's workshop, most of us like to sit at a table to write. So we need tables, right? So how do we want our tables set up? Do we want long tables? Do we want tables set up in groups? Or do people like to work alone? Do we want tables that can change so that we're together for some things, but we're separated for other things? And I think the idea is that that space has to be flexible. It has to be student driven, and it has to be designed with purpose, not just to look, you know, Pinterest ready, or not just to look like, you know, photo ready, right? But it's about, this is the format, the structure, the layout that best supports our learning, that increases student engagement in positive ways. And it may not look the same for every, it probably won't look the same for every teacher, but it may not even look the same for every learning experience within the same space, right? Within the same classroom. And so I think it's just about flexibility and relinquishing control. And that's hard to do because I had a conversation with a teacher the other day, and I'm the superintendent, right? But I'm facilitating this in-service course on Genius Hour. And one of the teachers was like, but you, like, we can't fail in front of the kids. We have to be on, you know, we have to do like a great job for our observation. We have to make sure we get it right for our kids. And I was like, oh my God, you're right. Like, that's ingrained in us, that it has to be perfect all the time. And that perfection even, you know, sort of drives the setup of the room. Everything, you know, the bulletin boards have to be beautiful, and the whiteboard has to be this, and it doesn't have to be that. And certainly that conversation has to include leadership, so they understand that they can't walk into a room and start penalizing people because they don't have desks faced a certain way or whatever. But that it's really a conversation that students are actively a part of, so that they see the room, they see themselves in the room, right? Like, this is a space I want to go work in. So yeah, that's what I would say about that.
That sounds really exciting for the students to be able to be a part of that. You know, talking about standardization in your role as superintendent, when you are, you know, thinking about curriculum and maybe even purchasing programs, if you do purchase programs, how do you balance the standardization of that program with the need for students and teachers to work outside of those lanes?
Yeah, sure. Listen, in my opinion, in my belief, in my philosophy, it's education is relationship driven and data informed, right? And so, and I think of data coming from programs and resources or whatever, but ultimately it's about the relationships. And I don't take credit for that. I learned that from my PLN. You know, I've learned that from Todd Whitaker. I've learned that from George, you know, Kouros. I've learned that from Jimmy Casas. I've learned that from Amber Tiemann. I've learned that from Brad Gustafson. I've learned it from Pernille Rip. I mean, these are the people who shape and influence my thinking about relationships. Because ultimately, whatever you do, whatever you need to enact, whether it's a curriculum or program, if you don't have, you know, strong and healthy relationships with your kids, it could be the worst program in the world. You're going to make it even worse. It could be the best program in the world. You're going to make it crap. So it's about that ability to understand the people who are sitting in front of you. I was talking to a 5th grade teacher the other day. So one of my good friends is Amy Badeji. She's a principal in California. If you don't follow her, I highly recommend it. She's elementary school principal. She's great. So we FaceTime for a moment because I had a question, and she happened to be in the middle of like an end of the year evaluation with the teacher. And the teacher says to me, all right, you're a superintendent. So what can I do to be a better 5th grade teacher next year, right? I was like, remember, you don't teach 5th grade, you teach 5th graders. And it was like something I didn't even think about, but she was like, that's it. Like, right, I don't teach 5th grade. I teach the 5th graders sitting in front of me, right? And so when we think about programs and we think about resources, it's the kids in front of us who drive how we use them. I hear the word fidelity thrown around a lot. When I use the fidelity, you know, I think fidelity is important at times, whether it's the model that we're talking about, you know, philosophy that we're talking about, or we're talking about working with a child that needs a specific program, right? For whatever reason, like maybe a child who is struggling with a reading disability and needs a specific program like Orton Gillingham or Wilson or Foundations or whatever to master skills to be able to access reading, then yeah, you want to make sure you do that with some level of fidelity, because theoretically the program is research based. So you want to make sure that you're implementing it in that way. But recognize the child sitting before you may not need A through Z of that program, right? And so how do you adopt it and adapt it? And I think that happens when you focus on teaching kids. Yeah, for me, it's not about trying to standardize a program. For me, it's about standardizing an approach, standardizing instructional techniques that we think are best, right? Like, if everyone can tier a lesson, that to me is far more important than whether or not everyone's using the same exact textbook at the same exact time. If everyone knows how to engage in a one-on-one conference with a kid, whether that's in reading, math, whatever, that's far more important to me than what book people are using. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's really where my mind sits on stuff like that.
It did. Thank you.
Yeah, no,
well, Tony, I don't want to keep you any longer. We want to try to be respectful of your time, and we're so thankful that you spent a few minutes with us, way more a few minutes than we originally agreed to. So I really do thank you for this. And I could have spent another hour and a half learning from you. It was an amazing experience, and I know that the people when they get to view this are going to feel the same way. So, and thank you for this book too, because I mean, to me, one of the most important books I've read this year, Hacking Leadership, and anyone who's out there who's planning to be a leader, or even just you want to be a better leader in your own classroom, pick this book up, because they really, I was telling Tony off the air before we came on, what I really appreciated about it was how they looked at the pushback, how they looked at the what I call the yeah but-isms, the ones that will come in and be like, yeah, but,
yes.
And they really addressed that. So check this book out if you haven't yet, and thanks, Tony. I really appreciate your time.
I thank you. I thank you for engaging in the book. I'm so glad it resonated with you. I think there is something in there for everyone. And ultimately, the great equalizer is our kids, our kids, right? And those yeah, but people, when they go to the but, just say, all right, time out. Instead of but, insert the word and then let's see how the conversation goes, right? And I learned that from my friend Tom Murray, who talks a lot about culture, and that's a culture thing. We have to be really intentional about what we do and how we do it, and what we hope to see in others. So whatever you do, whether you're teaching phys ed, whether you're the crossing guard, whether you're the building principal, be very intentional about everything we do, and we're focused on those relationships in front of you. So thank you, gentlemen, for having me. Thank you for reading our book. Enjoy your time with Joe Sanfelippo. You're going to have a blast. And the next time I'm in Pittsburgh, I'm gonna hit you up. Let me know where you're at.
We definitely will. I think we'll leave it at that. I don't think we could close it any better than you just did, Tony. So
thank you, gentlemen. Have a great day.
Thanks, Tony.
Bye-bye.